everyone. Hi. Good afternoon. Welcome to, I think this is the last session of the first day. Thank you all so much for coming here. Claps up to everyone. This is a very, very long first day. I don't know for anyone who's been traveling here. So even though there's a million of you in this room, which I'm not used to, I don't know about y'all, if everyone can just get up and then just stretch to the sky and just kind of shake off some of the like all day small talk, networking, try not to bash into anyone, stretch out a little bit. You gotta wake up a little bit before this last session, yeah? Okay, that's enough stretching. That's enough feeling good in your own body, right? Sit down, go back. So I'm Light Trung. I am the Vice President of Product Strategy at American Press Institute. This is actually, I think, my 7th week here, so I am extremely excited to be here and meet my team all in person and have a wonderful panel of awesome journalists here to talk about a huge, huge trend in trying to figure out in our industry, how do we reach more diverse audiences? And how do we reach younger audiences, right? That's the biggest question here. So I would love to quickly just introduce this roster of amazing journalists, then they will introduce themselves more in depth in each of their little sessions, about 10 minutes each, as I will be waving at them, making time. Allison, Naja, Mary Kelly, Felicia, and then myself too. So API is recently collaborated on a report that was really in depth, over 6,000 survey attendees. And it was really surveying what the news habits and attitudes of Gen Z and millennial generations are. So we've been doing this every couple of years, but this has been updated a little bit more. And we collaborated with the Associated Press and Nork Center of Public Affairs Research and really trying to figure out what the opportunities are for reaching this audience in general. So before we get into some of the findings here, I would love to ask all of you, what do we think we know about young audiences in general? Just shout them out. What have you had to change to try to reach young audiences over the last several years?
Relying on social media.
Relying on social media.
They like video.
They like video. We had to pivot to video. Yeah?
Digital natives.
Digital natives.
More interested in diverse narratives.
More interested in diverse narratives and local narratives. Mm-hmm. Short attention spans. What else? Busy and tired. Is that just young people? Okay. So a lot of what we found from talking to 6,000 people in this general cohort is surprising. So as I said before, we are, generally the demographic for young people here is readers ages 16 to 40, which, hello, yay, that's great. And so there's a lot of things that we found out that was very, very interesting to us. Many of these people use traditional news outlets, not just social platforms, which upended even my understanding. I've been working for a little bit over a decade in mostly national newsrooms, trying to appeal to younger readers and more diverse readers in general, which too often get lumped into one. It's not just going after TikTok or just like Twitter back in the day or all these different things. There's also this really surprising finding that a really overwhelming majority of them actually are willing to pay for news. There's a really interesting thing around trying to figure out traditional and novel expectations around news, but kind of like everyone else, the trust is falling more in news in general. They're going more towards local news outlets, and enjoyment is sort of falling since there's a lot of over-focus on crime and a lot of politics and hard news. This is kind of a trend that we all knew about in general, but also I think one of the things that you just covered, which is many of these respondents think that the media fails to accurately cover communities of color and immigrants in America, which is a session that we actually just hosted right before this, if you were able to come to that as well. So some things that we knew, some things that we didn't. I will have a link to the entire survey later, which you can dig into a little bit more. And if you follow AmPress on Twitter, we are live tweeting some of these things in general. But during this panel, what we want to be able to hear from local newsrooms around the country is what experiments have worked so far in reaching diverse communities, young readers in general, what has worked, what hasn't. And we want to hear from all of you as well, not just the stereotypes of what we think young readers, readers that we are not capturing in some way, who don't trust us in some way. What has worked, what hasn't so far? And both of those things are really vital in the conversation. Okay, so I mentioned that this is my 6th or 7th week at API. I most recently came to API from the Washington Post, where I was in charge of a newsroom research and development group, and also trying to figure out how do we make money off of new experiments for young audiences in general. So I think one of these misnomers of young audiences is really just an exercise in making coverage relevant to everyone, you know, like in checking your own assumptions. It's not just visual storytelling or just like these super short video clips for someone who can't pay attention to these things. One thing that we really were able to capture in the Next Gen initiative at the Washington Post that really changed my thinking about how to reach young readers better was during the Surfside condo collapse. And really, like, we could see interest dropping off as many developments were coming out. And we were really failing to reach younger readers. It was a lot of folks who were in Florida already and all these different things. And we were trying to figure out how do we have a next gen angle to this and include more young readership. Part of it was the assumption of looking at our own reporting. A lot of young readers were not homeowners. They don't know what it means to own a condo, the HOA fees that come with that, the infrastructure that that community is supposed to be able to cover for you, and how something like this could even happen. So if we report on those things, skimming over those assumptions, then we aren't reaching young readers in that, you know, narrative as well. It didn't have to be something flashy or something that you can explain in like a minute on TikTok, even though we also did that and tried that as well. So that was something that really was, I thought, a really transformative experiment in trying to figure out how do we do this in all of our coverage, open the door to more readers in different ways by really just reporting on our own coverage as well. Like, what else do we know statistically about these communities that we could use to accurately cover the topic? So I'm going to pass it to my esteemed panelists to talk about experiments and successes all over the country in regional newsrooms. We want to hear from y'all as well. But since there's so many of us in this room, there's a couple things that I will ask us to do. If you agree with something, do these little snaps instead of yelling out like yay or something like that. If you have a question, we have a Q&A part of this as well. So hold on to that question, and I think we will use that microphone at the end. And also tweet at us. At AmPress is tweeting, and feel free to tag us on Twitter to do those kinds of things. That's it from me for now. I'm going to pass it over to Naja Parker.
Hello, everyone. How's everybody feeling today? Thank you for the snaps. I appreciate it. Well, my name is Naja Parker. I am a newsletter coach at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. I've been with the AJC since 2016, and I've been working on our newsletter products for about 2 years now. So I'm here to talk about one of our experiments. So newsletters have always been a part of our AJC newsletter offerings, but last year the newsroom decided to put special emphasis on revitalizing our newsletter strategy. So we decided to participate in Table Stakes. Is anybody familiar with their program? Okay, I heard some snaps. So for those of you who do not know, Table Stakes is a year-long program that helps newsrooms better their strategies from business down onto culture. We participated in that, and we had 2 different groups. We had a collaboration partnerships groups, and we also had a newsletter group. So within that year, our newsletter team decided to discover what underrepresented communities we were not serving. So we looked at some past data from our past readership studies, and we learned that the Black community was one of them. Our readership was mostly white, and so that told us that we had some gaps in our coverage. So we know a few things about our studies. Yes, our audience mostly leans white, but we also know some really obvious factors as well. Atlanta is significant. It is known as a cultural hotspot. We know that it has several nicknames: Black Mecca, the Black Hollywood, Hollywood of the South, Wakanda Forever, like the list just goes on and on and on. So we really wanted to lean into what we already knew about our city. Atlanta also has just such deep roots in the civil rights community, and we know that some of your favorite artists, some of your favorite activists, some of your favorite actors are also from Atlanta. So we wanted to highlight that as well. So that played a role in us making a decision to focus on the Black community. We also know that we have journalists who are fully embedded in these communities already. They are eager to share their stories. We have so many beats, from investigative reporting to education reporting, and sometimes we want to just talk about our own community. So we were really excited that our reporters were into the idea of serving this community who were a little bit more unfamiliar with us. So this is when we came up with Unapologetically ATL. What is Unapologetically ATL? I am glad you asked. It is the latest newsletter from the AJC. It comes out every Thursday, and it is a newsletter that covers the trends, the news, and the topics that are shaping the Black community in Atlanta. We have a variety of topics that we cover, from influencer culture to segregation with housing. We also cover Juneteenth. This newsletter is primarily led by our co-hosts, Ernie Suggs and Nedgerone. You see them pictured in the photograph there, smiling at each other. Believe it or not, they have a lot of arguments about what to cover, so this picture is rare. So while they are our primary hosts, we have also invited other people from our newsroom to participate in helping us build this product. So our newsletter, our AJC friends, they've shared their stories, they've shared their favorite books, TV shows, and things to do around the city. They've also shared playlists and music that have inspired them. So it really is a group effort. The newsletter has been around for about a year now. We celebrated our 1-year anniversary on September 16th. Snaps. And we're so excited. We have implemented a couple of strategies to help us just boost engagement with this particular core group. One of the very first things we tried was more technical. We needed to simplify our sign-up process. We noticed that there were way too many steps involved in getting folks to sign up for a newsletter. So one, you had to register for an account on the AJC, and then the account would take you to a newsletter page where you would have to manage your subscription, and we found that process to be extremely wonky. So we just simplified it by providing a link, and when you click on the link, it will take you to a site that briefly describes what your newsletter, what your product is about in just a couple of sentences, and there's a box for you to put your email address. That's it. No need to sign in for your AJC account or try to find out where the newsletter page is on their website. We simplified their process, and we found that to be a huge win for us. Once we started promoting this link, our launch week, we got 1,000 subscribers just from simplifying the process. So you can think of things that are on the technical side that might be making it difficult for your readers to find out what products that you offer. So this was a really big win for us. Another thing that we tried was collaborating with influencers. I mentioned earlier that that is one of the topics that we covered. One of the stories we featured in the newsletter was on Desi Banks. Is anybody familiar with him? Mm-mm. Okay. Snaps. He is a Black comedian from Atlanta, Georgia. He does a bunch of skits and fun plays on his Instagram account. He also has 6 million followers on Instagram, and that was at the time. I took a look at his Instagram page before the session. Now it's 7.8 million followers. So we saw that he had significant reach, and he actually had the audience that we were trying to capture, young and Black. So we collaborated with him by doing a profile story on him. We also did some promo features, including videos, and we gave him these assets to share with his 6 million followers, and he did it, and that really worked for us as well. Another thing we've experimented with is surveys. This, to me, didn't seem obvious in the beginning, but it really is obvious. If you want to know the type of topics that your readers are interested in, just ask them. So we started putting surveys into our newsletter. We asked folks questions about the topics that they're interested in learning more about. We also asked them information about their demographics, because the goal with this newsletter is to cater to the Black community, so we wanted to make sure that we were doing that. We also wanted to know how folks consume their news, where they're getting their news from, and how they signed up for our newsletter. And we also had to play with the placement of this survey. We put the survey, where you see the image at the top my left, top left of the corner. We initially put that survey in the middle of the newsletter, and after the first week, nobody clicked on it. And we were like, okay, so, nobody is interested, nobody likes us. But a simple placement to the top really made a difference, and we got a lot of respondents from that. So from our survey, we found that folks in the community that we want to reach, they're interested in local news, they're interested in entertainment, and they're interested in lifestyle topics. So we use this survey to help us guide the type of content that we want to include in our newsletter. So that doesn't mean we don't include harder news stories. We have to just be mindful and more intentional about how we use the angle. So for example, we put in a story about Herschel Walker and Raphael Warnock. Election season is hot fire in Georgia right now, especially. So we didn't want to just talk about their platforms, but we wanted to talk about the historical significance of two black men running for a Senate office, and that hadn't happened in years. And so by taking that angle to the story, we got a lot of clicks on it. Another thing that we experimented with were contests. We had a contest giveaway for Falcons tickets. So if you want to enter to win tickets to go see the Falcons, and at the time they weren't doing good, we should have gave away Braves tickets. And people signed up because they knew that they had something that they were going to get out of it. And then it was also an opportunity for us to put our brand in front of folks. A couple of other things that we've tried, we've put polls into our newsletter. Somebody mentioned video earlier. We also do podcasts that you can listen to. And we also have been paying attention to paid social media, using ads where we can target the specific audiences that we want to capture. And one of the most recent things we've done is events. So we have both virtual and in-person events. The majority of the events we've done have been free, so we've given people the opportunity to come hear about the coverage that we have in the AJC. So one event we did was on Juneteenth. It was the first year of it really being a national government holiday, and we also did one on HBCUs with students returning back to campus after 2 rough years of being in the pandemic. So these events, again, they are free. We just want to get our product in front of people and let folks know that the AJC does have stories and coverage that caters to the Black community. And lastly, we just want to expand our team. We've added job postings for a culture reporter to help us really hone in on these specific topics. And we also recently added a data analyst to our team to help us do more research and to help us implement more data and survey questions into our newsletter. So these are a few of the things that have happened or that have helped us, and we just want to continue to boost engagement with other tactics. And if you want to sign up for the newsletter, I gladly welcome it. The newsletter comes out every Thursday morning, so if you sign up right now with that seamless, easy sign-up link, you will have an edition in your inbox in the morning. So I'll pass it on to the next speaker. Thank you for your time.
All right, next up is Allison Shirk. There you go.
Hello, everyone. My name is Allison Shirk, and I'm going to give 2 disclaimers before I get started. First, we are in the middle of this experiment. This is not a full run-through of an experiment that has been successful. I still have no idea if it's going to be that successful, so I don't know why they asked me to be here, but there's that. Second of all, I was putting together this presentation at the very last minute, like all great panelists do, and I got a Facebook notification from a video from 11 years ago, and it was my 12-year-old niece learning how to walk. And like a great aunt, I sent it to her, and I said, thinking she would enjoy the video. And the response I got back was, I don't even have Facebook. Facebook is for old people. So I feel like that just encapsulates where we're at right now. So I was listening actually to the Source Matters session before this, and this really sat with me. And this is really the reason why the Times Free Press, which is in Chattanooga, Tennessee, if you're not familiar with it, is where it's at right now. And Latrell from that session says you need to think of the specific needs of your community and cater it to that. So like Eli was saying before, and like we were saying with Instagram and social media and videos, at the Times Free Press, we are just making a bunch of assumptions of what our younger readers want. We've taken traditional content, we've manipulated a little bit, put it on Instagram, and you're like, okay, well now we're reaching younger readers. which we all know doesn't really work. So we kind of learned a valuable lesson in that. You can't just all of a sudden start catering to community and expect them to find you. You have to go to them. So that's what we're doing now. And there is this anonymous man named Eric, who is an artist in Chattanooga who has no idea that I've taken such inspiration from him, and that I'm about to present at ONA all about his art, but here we are. So there is a man named Eric. Eric is not dead. Do not worry. Eric is not dead. If your name is Eric, I'm sorry if this triggers you. So Eric started during the pandemic putting this all over Oops, I'm sorry. Is it up there? Okay. Eric started putting it all over Chattanooga, the south side of Chattanooga specifically. It's kind of an up-and-coming neighborhood. Really, it was nothing 10 years ago. In the last 5 years, it's really taken off. A lot of restaurants, boutiques, art galleries, live events, music, stuff like that. So during the pandemic, Eric got bored and decided that he was going to start writing Eric is Dead all over the city, specifically the south side. He wrote it on brick buildings, he wrote it on mailboxes, he wrote it on utility boxes, he wrote it on window panes, he started writing it in different languages. Don't ask me how I know this, but he started putting it in bar bathrooms. Like, he just started putting it everywhere. And then eventually you could find stickers, like, at the front kiosk of coffee shops, okay? So Eric, don't worry, I went all around the south side and took these photos. People thought I was crazy. All over. And then finally, Eric is not dead, as we're all aware. So I observed this, and I'm like, oh, wow, this is really interesting. I probably observed this in, like, December or January. And like every good journalist, I observed something really cool, and then I forgot about it. And turns out my boss also observed this, did exactly what I did, and forgot about it. So I'm sitting at my desk one day, and all of a sudden I get an email newsletter from our main competitor for young readers, You Get Today. 6 a.m. City, if any of you ever heard them, they have some publications. Somebody's probably here from there. Yeah, okay, great. I don't like you. Okay, so I'm just kidding. I learn a lot from y'all. So anyways, so I get this email newsletter in my inbox, and the subject line is, The Story Behind Eric is Dead. And I sat there, and I was like, excuse my language, oh shit. And I got up, and I walked into my boss's office, and I said, have you ever heard of Eric is Dead? And she goes, yeah, I just got the email newsletter. How cool of a story is that? And I'm literally looking at her, and I'm like, I looked out in the newsroom, and I thought, I love our journalists. I love our newsroom. Not a single person in this newsroom would have thought to write that story. I was like, and that is our problem. There's like this big cultural awakening happening in the South Side, happening all over Chattanooga. New people are moving to the city. We're not the traditional white conservative buckle of the Bible Belt that we used to be anymore. We're really changing, and we're especially changing during the pandemic. A lot of people found out Chattanooga is a really cool place to live. People from Atlanta, Nashville, California moved to Chattanooga because they don't like or they love no state income tax. So a lot of people from outside are moving in, and they're really changing just the cultural makeup of Chattanooga. It's getting more diverse, experience and opinions are more diverse, and we're just seeing this huge shift. And we have nobody in our newsroom to actually address that. So, and this is just a good example. Even this year, we wrote a whole magazine edition for our magazine of all of the young professionals that are coming to Chattanooga en masse. So our first step was, who do we need to reach? We need to reach these new people, okay? These new people who've moved here, been here less than 5 years, most of them less than 2 to 3 because of the pandemic. And they're not your traditional reader. They're not even your traditional Chattanoogan who grew up here and is in their 30s or 40s. Most of them are childless. They're engaged, but they have no idea how to be engaged. They haven't really thought of their legacy newspaper as somewhere where they would get their news because they're just not from here. That's just not ingrained to them. Their grandparents and their parents and grandparents didn't get their news from the Chattanooga Times-Free Press. So we start there. So then it was, how do we reach them? So we identified 3 groups in Chattanooga that would help us do this. Young professionals of Chattanooga, this group called Chattanoogies, which I just love the name. And then there's this new downtown social club that opened about a year ago. Now, think of like your traditional country club, caters to what? Older white people. So they wanted to be something different. They're called Common House. They actually took an abandoned YMCA downtown and converted it into this sort of downtown urban social club. And it draws all kinds of people, especially creatives. It's like the epitome of how Chattanooga is changing. If I could look at one place in Chattanooga, it's this place, and they have 2,000 members. So I was like, all right, I've got to get to the brainchild of this place. So the first thing I did was I went up to our advertising department because there's no Berlin Wall there anymore. We can go there. And I asked the advertising person who knows every single person in Chattanooga, how do I get in touch with the director of membership at Common House? And she had him on speed dial. So we get an interview with him. This guy, I basically asked the question, if you were to see a Common House member on the side of the road, how would you describe them? And this is how he described them. He gave all of these descriptors. Now, obviously, this is very unscientific, but as the director of membership, this man reads all 2,000 applications that have come in. He knows his audience, okay? I, full disclosure, am a member of Common House, and the application you have to fill out is absurd. It is so extensive, and they ask the weirdest questions, but they say they do that because they want to make sure they have a diverse set of people in there. They don't want just the C-suite, those kinds of people. They're not trying to be the same mold over and over, okay? So that's what we got from him. Then the second thing, we did a 4-question survey. I know there's 5 questions up there. I can't count. We did a 4-question survey, and there was a big music festival happening 2 days after this Young Professionals of Chattanooga After Hours event. And we got free music ticket festivals from one of our sponsors, and we said, hey, at the after hours, there's about 40 people. We got about 50% response rate, so 20 people. And we asked them, hey, fill out this survey, and you'll be entered to win these music festival tickets. So we got a response from that. More people actually filled out number 5 than I thought. But we basically just asked them these first questions to get a general gist. And this is what we got from that. So not as much as from the director of membership, but we got those responses, okay? So that's where we're at in the experiment now. That's why I said we're in the middle of it. So the next part is this. We have an event planned at Common House in early October. The goal there is to actually get one-on-one with members, have them fill out the survey, start with a focus group, sit 10 or so of them down that are really representative of the whole community, and get their thoughts and feelings on that. And then to also do some paid promotion around the survey on social media as well, and targeting that sector and not just doing it on Instagram and reaching the readers we already have. So that's kind of where we're at now in the process. Like I said, we're not totally done. I do want to give a shout out though, because a lot of this is a version of what This Is Tucson did. Is anybody here familiar with This Is Tucson? Yay, snaps for This Is Tucson. Irene McKisson, who I don't think is there anymore. But anyways, she helped sort of launch This Is Tucson, this product. They created a woman named Jessica. So our goal here is to create someone like Jessica. Jessica is an early 90s baby. She has 2 kids. There's like a whole list of things they created. She spoke at 2019 ONA. You could probably go find the recording. But anyways, it was really, really thorough. It was really good. They did one-on-one surveys. They sort of took a different approach. I think what they did was kind of word of mouth from young person to young person, where we went to like groups. So you can do it either way, but I highly recommend at least getting out there and talking to that young audience. And then this is just a shameless plug. We're hiring a reporter that will eventually serve this audience. We're trying to put our money where our mouth is, which means just moving money around in the budget for a small newsroom. But we're basically trying to hire somebody who will actually serve this audience. Now, it says food and culture reporter. We're still going through the data. That might change. But this is my shameless plug for that. And that's all I have. And I think I hit my 10 minutes. Okay, thank you.
Okay, great. And then Mary Kelly, you're up.
Well, hello, I'm Mary Kelly Polka. I am the executive editor of the Florida Times Union in Jacksonville and the deputy Florida editor for the Gannett USA Today network. And I'll start mine with the plug here that we are hiring in Jacksonville, but we're also hiring throughout Florida. So if you have an interest in anything, just hit me up while I'm here and while you're here. So very similar themes to what you've just heard from my new friends over there. We were a part of Table Stakes back in 2020. And it was something that at the last minute we'd heard about, but it was the perfect thing for us to do. And I'll explain a little bit about our background to kind of help explain that. We are a typical legacy newsroom. The newspaper has been around for 150 plus years. I'm sure many of you work at similar newsrooms like that. And what we have found is, unfortunately, it's probably something similar as well. For generations, our newspaper focused largely on a male, middle class audience. Sometimes you'd get things that were kind of focused towards women, and that might have been cooking or gardening. I don't know how many of y'all who are women in the room cook and garden, but I don't do either of them, so you would have lost me ages ago. But it was worse than that in many ways. We were a newspaper in a town, and I'm talking decades ago, where if there were stories about Black residents, they were not done in a fair and contextual way. So, and again, while I go back years, in this particular case, I'm talking 1960, the story on the left over there, the struggle. In 1960, a group of white men with axe handles assaulted Black residents and workers in our downtown area. The Florida Times-Union barely covered it. It was on the New York Times, it was in Time magazine, it made the rounds, but its local newspaper did not cover this. So even before table stakes, we had come a long way. We were covering stories about our diverse community before I became the editor in 2017. We were doing stories, including in 2020, we had done something about the 50-year anniversary, or 60-year anniversary of Axe Handle, where we apologized. We pointed out specifically what the Florida Times-Union did do and didn't do back then. But it wasn't lost on us that many people never saw those stories, which brings me to the story on the right. Walking While Black was a story we did in 2017 with our friends at ProPublica. A guy who used to work at the Times-Union had gone on to ProPublica and then helped me hire his replacement. And a guy was walking in kind of on the outskirts of downtown Jacksonville one day, gets stopped by the cops who ask him for his papers. It spurs a story where we looked at the data and looked at how often Black people in Jacksonville are stopped on the streets walking along, which in many cases, even if somebody tried to say that they were passing in a place where they shouldn't have, there was no law in the books that allowed such a thing, such an arrest. So we do this great story. Vox Media does a fabulous video that goes with it. And to this day, people say to me, if you all could just do something like that Walking While Black thing, did y'all see what ProPublica did? I'm like, we did that with ProPublica. But people weren't seeing it, and why would they have? For generations, the Times-Union didn't cover them. Our whole community, people had given up on us ages ago. And so no matter what we were writing, if no one was seeing it, were we writing it? Did it matter? In that case, at least we'd had something with ProPublica, and so more people did see that story, and it caused change in our community. But had we alone done it, it may not have. So we started Table Stakes in 2020, and the idea was being more intentional about our engagement with our full community, which, again, we had already made such great strides with things like Walking While Black and so many other stories. But we needed to figure out a way how we would get the message out that we were doing these stories. So it's old-fashioned community-based reporting. It was making sure that people were not going to the same sources time and time again. It was community engagement, we started during COVID, so in our case, we were starting more with Zoom conversations, but we also do in-person things as well. Partnered with other media to make sure that people understood what we were doing. But the thing I want to talk about mostly today is our strategic use of Instagram. So, as mentioned, Facebook is for old people. As my daughter, who's 17, likes to remind me, she's never been on Facebook. I don't know that she would know how to even log in. But Instagram is definitely a place that she is often. as are a lot more people. And that was part of the thing that our coach was talking to us at the time. Instagram could be a good option for us. So we made sure that the stories we were regularly doing, we were then putting out more on Instagram. Now, the person that we had doing most of this just left a couple weeks ago, which is in part why we're hiring at the moment. But Emily Block was using Canva, and there was a session earlier today, a little bit on that. But she was really taking stories that she did or others were doing and made sure that we were getting them out in a way that everyone was able to see what we were doing. The way that she had described it at the time was obviously featuring more young people, in part, more diverse people. Engage with more of those people, so when people were actually talking to us on Instagram, that we were responding in some way, and often. But then letting those responses help drive our coverage, which was a really big part of this whole engagement thing. It wasn't just us always telling people something that we thought they wanted to know, but hearing from people what they wanted to know, which takes you back to the study early on of what exactly is it that people want. And so to do that, we were doing more of the carousels and sliders, reels, all the little things that you can do on Instagram, all the things that many of you are probably doing in your own way, but again, more intentional. We mark stories every day saying, this would be a good story for Instagram, we believe, and try to really think up different ways to be able to share some of that. And then we're thinking to ourselves this idea that if you don't trust us in the first place, putting this out there and asking you to pay us money seemed maybe not the brightest idea. So putting out more where we're not really asking you for anything. We're just sharing it, and we're giving you as much as you could use if you wanted just the surface level information, and then we're going to go deeper. So in these stories, one was about dress code violations, which were not, as you might imagine, handled the same at every school and for every person. And the bottom one was about concerns about Black Lives Matters Month. These are both stories that somebody gave the idea to Emily. She did both of them. But then she's trying to tell as much of the story as those students who shared them with her would at least be able to say, somebody listened to me, somebody heard me, and they're sharing this. And we would tell them even more beyond this, the people that gave them to them, so that they would see that it ended up on the front page, which both of these stories did, as did many others. The one on the right here is the something many of your newsrooms are probably doing, prep sports. These were just some of the, some of the best athletes. And our prep sports reporter and one of our photographers put that together in a way that, how would you not, if you were one of the athletes, want to share this, or if you were one of their parents? And knowing that it wasn't just this traditional gray type in a newspaper sort of a thing, but it was something that kind of popped in a different way. And COVID, this was a thing that led you to more answers depending on where you lived in our community and your answers to some of them. So there's plenty of ways that you can get incredibly creative with all of this. But we also then went deeper. Obviously, we believe a big part of our mission is to put a spotlight on the things that are wrong in our community and hold powerful people to account. And so these are both recent stories. A Duval transgender student barred from joining a boys soccer team when we asked questions. The district realized that they had messed up. It wasn't the district, but a particular school. And this tells more of the story if you kept going through it, but I just showed you the first one. And then the other one about runners at a local university saying that their coach had created this very toxic environment. We did not break the story. We went more in depth to put it all together and add the context to it and to be that voice of, kind of validity, that we were able to say this is what happened. And of course, it doesn't all have to be. And it was one of the big things that we said early on. We did not believe that we should be always writing about a community like a Walking While Black type story where there were things that weren't, that there were problems. We need to do those stories, but we also need to have fun. And we wanted things that we could share that other people will want to share. And so whether it was something about vegan food or best Jewish food in the community, which we've done both of, or the one on the other side there, Duval County is where we live. You would know the term Duval if you follow the Jacksonville Jaguars. I'm willing to bet you money nobody in here would snap if I asked you if you do, so I'm not going to not discourage my hometown team. But this was just a bingo card sort of a thing if you had an issue, if you knew any of these kinds of things. And those become very popular. So what it ends up with is something that is higher in engagement for us. We went often, and not to say that there are not times you only get dozens of likes and people responding on things, but we saw an immediate increase in overall engagement for these stories. We don't see as many people come specifically from Instagram as far as subscribers, though I think all of you, if you're using it, you see that more as like you're on it and then you Google whatever you're looking for after. Not quite the Twitter thing where you're asking someone to click and come from that story. But we know that we're getting subscribers from many of them because people talk to us about those as well. And they're on those stories. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you. A quick shout out to something that I think before we have our last speaker, Felicia, up here, is something that I wrote in Neiman Love a couple of years ago as a prediction of not only how do we reach our own audiences outside our newsrooms, but how do we set up our newsrooms internally as a sort of culture change point. There's a lot of things that, I've only been in news for about 11, 12 years that I've already had to start to unlearn, including like not changing what we're doing, right? So how do we create a more adaptive culture that we hand down to journalists that come after us and mentor us? So that's something to think about as well, not just externally, but how do you try to reach younger and more diverse folks in your own newsrooms, which then sort of like helps change how you reach your readers in the future. All right, Felicia, I'm gonna hand it to you.
Hi. So I couldn't think of a more perfect transition into this presentation, so thank you. So Cal Matters, for those of you who might not be familiar with us, we're a nonprofit newsroom. We cover state policy and politics in California. And we started the College Journalism Network in 2020. And I was the higher education reporter at Cal Matters at the time. And we looked out at the landscape and we saw, higher ed is such an important beat in this state. We have literally millions of students in California, and we have just a small handful of people covering this beat full time. Meanwhile, we have all these student journalists who know a ton about what's going on their campuses and need more support. So we thought, what would it look like if we brought student journalists into covering the impact of higher education policy on campuses at the statewide level? So that's how the College Journalism Network was born. And its mission is threefold, really to broaden and deepen Cal Matters higher education coverage by focusing on student voices, to provide high quality training to student journalists, and to help diversify the news media, both within our newsroom and throughout California. So the way it works is we bring student journalists from around the state on board for part-time paid fellowships that they can do from their campuses, wherever they are. We recruit fellows that really reflect the diversity of California students. We have University of California students, Cal State students, community college students, private college students. We particularly emphasize folks that are underrepresented in newsrooms, and that can look a variety of ways. That includes, but is not limited to, Black and Indigenous journalists, LGBTQ journalists, community college journalists, and journalists from rural areas. And then we meet weekly to plan coverage and receive training. So those weekly editorial meetings alternate between story brainstorming sessions, kind of a normal newsroom meeting, and then more structured trainings where we're talking about how do you find the right public records for a story, for example. What is solutions journalism? How do you navigate the industry as an early career journalist? And then those stories that the student journalists produce, both individually and collaboratively, are running on calmatters.org. And as a nonprofit, we're also offering our media coverage to media outlets around the state. And I want to emphasize, I think what sets our program apart from other fellowship and internship programs is, number one, that we really come from the starting point that students are the experts on what's going on their campuses. So every aspect of our program is really driven by our fellows and their ideas, interests, and curiosity. So that means them pitching and moving their own story ideas and projects. That means, deciding what public events we're going to put on as a collective. All of those decisions are made among the fellows themselves with, of course, guidance and support from CalMatters staff. And let's see. And I guess the second thing I want to say about that was the collaborative nature of the reporting, I think is really key. So we're really building a supportive community of student journalists that are working together, putting together the little pieces of what they're seeing on their campuses to create this larger mosaic of what's happening in higher ed on a state level. So what that can look like is last week we had our kickoff training for our new cohort of fellows that started this fall. We had a fellow that was working on a story about the search for a new community college chancellor. And she was based up in Northern California, and she was looking for students to interview. And she connected with our student that's at a Cal State campus in Southern California, but was a community college transfer student, and said, oh, no problem, I know, I can put you in contact with students at 5 different community colleges in the area. So your story has more geographic diversity. So that's one of the ways that that looks. So since 2020, we've had 50 fellows and regular contributors come through our program. Many have landed at national and state and local media outlets, are now pursuing careers in journalism everywhere from NPR and the Wall Street Journal at the national level to the San Francisco Chronicle, the LA Times, our newsroom, CalMatters as well. And we have public trainings that hundreds of student journalists have attended. So we open up many of our trainings to all student journalists in California. And then we also host public town halls and other events. So again, those events in total have been attended by hundreds of students around the state. And then here are a couple of things that our graduates have said about our program, right? CalMatters was so monumental in helping me build confidence. There's a sense of belonging that can sometimes be hard to find. This program really gives you an edge. So I think that those two comments that we just heard from alums at our kickoff training actually this past week really hits on both of those points. Helping students to find their own place in the industry while also giving them really high quality training as reporters. So what is a College Journalism Network story? So we tell stories that focus on state policy, on higher education, that center student voices. We try to tell stories that are not being told by other outlets, that hold powerful people and systems accountable. And we also try and play with story formats and experiment in ways that can sometimes trickle down to the larger CalMatters newsroom, or trickle up, maybe I should say. So here's a good example. This is from the 2020 election, but I like to point to it because it's kind of a classic CalMatters story. So this is when California was considering a ballot proposition about affirmative action. So it would have repealed the state ban on affirmative action in public education, particularly in relation to admissions and hiring. And there was a lot of media coverage about this proposition, and a lot of it treated Asian Americans in this very kind of homogenous way. Meaning, painted with a broad brush that Asian American communities and students were opposed to this proposition, and they were largely opposed to affirmative action. So we had a fellow on our team who thought that the story was more complicated. They went out and talked to a lot of Asian American students to get a sense of the spectrum of opinion and the variety of experiences in terms of access to higher education that existed among communities. How are Hmong students in the Central Valley feeling about this proposition in a way that might be different from South Asian students in the Bay Area? And so they reported this story. A radio version of this story also aired on KQED. And this is actually part of a team of students that did stories about this ballot proposition. And all of those stories aired as a package. We took over KQED's news magazine program, the California Report, for a day with the stories by our student reporters. And the reporter who did this story, they are now actually a staff reporter at Capital Public Radio in Sacramento. So what we're doing is really creating spaces where students can talk to each other about higher education in California and the issues they're facing. And that happens on both the micro level and also the macro level. So the micro level, I put our mascot up there. We actually have a mascot. It's Paco the Llama. And the mascot was drawn by a former fellow, Emily Forrest-Chen, who's at San Diego State. And I put that up there just because to emphasize, like, we're the kind of program that has a mascot, right? We have our fellows constantly in contact with each other on Slack, on Twitter, in our editorial meetings. And we really try and create a space where they can talk about, I'm trying to get the PIO on my campus to talk to me and they're stonewalling. What do I do? Or I'm one of a handful of students of color on my student paper and I'm dealing with microaggressions all the time. How are you guys handling that, right? So I think the community is really important there. And I want to also emphasize here that our students a lot of times are experiencing some of the same issues that they're covering, right? They might be reporting on homelessness and food insecurity on their campus and themselves experiencing those issues. So this is a space where they can talk about these issues as both journalists and human beings. And then on the macro level, we hold public forums. So this is an example from a town hall we did about campus policing. This is Ja'Cory Bowens, former student activist at San Francisco State, speaking about his take on police reform on campus. And this was a very interesting time. This was last year where there was kind of a lot of conversation happening about campus policing, but it was like happening in these silos, right? You had these very sanitized conversations among administrators and academics, and then you had all these student activists that were calling for campus police to be abolished in some cases, but also talking a lot about the very kind of raw personal experiences they were having with campus policing. So we created a panel where they could all come together. We had the chair of the UC Board of Regents, as well as students and faculty, and the discussion got pretty heated, but in a really fascinating and productive way. So what have we learned so far? And I know I'm short on time, so I'll try and move through this quickly. So one thing we learned is that when you involve people affected by policy and covering the stories about those policies, you surface stories that you wouldn't otherwise. And I think our coverage throughout the pandemic shows that, from covering schools charging students hundreds of dollars to attend orientations that were taking place entirely online, to the experience of transfer students transferring to a campus and not being able to go there and see it in person, to immunocompromised students on campus this year dealing with the fact that COVID protections were being lifted and they felt unsafe. All of those were stories that I think we wouldn't have covered if we didn't have the team that we did. And the way that you cover those stories also shifts. And I'll try and be quick here, but I did want to mention this piece because this is another story we did about campus policing. One of our fellows was actually reporting on the data that's available about police traffic and pedestrian stops on campus. And in the midst of trying to get data out of his university, this fellow, Julian, who happens to be Latino, was stopped by his campus police for biking on campus. He was surrounded, he was followed almost to his house, surrounded by 2 cop cars and several officers, and questioned for quite a bit. So he wrote this reported essay about what this was like as a person and as a journalist, and how it related to the larger reporting that he had been doing about the relationships between students of color and police on campus. Our audience tends to track younger than CalMatters audience overall. Flipping through these quickly because I know I'm short on time. And lastly, I just wanted to say that student journalists don't want to just join the industry, they want to transform it. They're having really serious conversations about the traditional notions of objectivity, how do we react to news as human beings as well as journalists. They're really interested in holding powerful people to account, and they're really looking for a newsroom that says things like, hey, you're really interested in covering Indigenous students and the barriers they face in accessing education. Let's help you create a mini beat around that and tell those stories. And I'll pause there and let us take questions.
Thank you, Felicia. Appreciate it. All right, so really, really quickly, because we are very, very short on time, something that I do want everyone to take away from this is just like one thing that you might have been inspired a little bit, and ask yourself what's one thing that you might take and try in your newsroom. Is there something that you can position a little bit differently? Here, really quickly, is that study that I breezed through really, really quickly, but there's a lot of good insights here. So feel free to check that out. But let's go over to Ask Us Anything. Let me just leave this up, and then y'all know the Ask Us Anything thing. Yeah. How do we want to do this? Do y'all want us to use the mic, or shall I just bring a mic around? Let me just start calling on people, yeah? Go ahead.
Okay, so
I get a mic for her?
I'm loud. It carries.
I'm sorry, Hannah, you are the best. Thank you. Oh, yes.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ria. I'm engagement producer at KQED. I have a question about surveys because we have tried surveys and we get very lackluster results. And I'm wondering how we can make surveys fun and sexy and engaging, specifically with a younger audience, but also, making it something that's digestible because we want across the board. And it seems like you guys have had some success with that. So what's the sweet spot with surveys? Is it 5 questions? Is it, specific to demographics? And we have multiple different surveys for each demographic. So, yeah.
Well, we've experimented with surveys just one time, so I don't know if I'm the expert on it, but we did have a variety of questions in the survey. And I think what helps is if you add some type of incentive to it. So maybe let them know how long it's going to take for them to get through the survey, set expectations on the front end, and are they going to get something out of the survey when they complete it? Maybe it's a $20 gift card to Amazon, or maybe it's a ticket to a Braves game or a chance to enter another type of contest. But to make it fun and sexy for a younger crowd, I would suggest adding some incentive and letting folks know what to expect before they click on it. Because if they're scrolling for days and days and days and there's no end in sight, they're not going to finish your survey. And also, placement was really important for us. We had that survey in the middle of the newsletter, and we realized folks weren't clicking on it because it was hidden. It became wallpaper in the newsletter. So make sure that folks are actually seeing where you're placing it.
Yeah, I would say too, I would have gotten like 5 responses instead of 25 if I hadn't been giving away music festival tickets. Like, know your audience. Like, we tend to generalize to like young audiences like we do other communities, and like focus your survey too. Like, I went to the young professionals of Chattanooga because I knew that's who I was trying to get. Like, I'm not just trying to throw this out on all social media. Just focus it, short, sweet, and give something away.
Next question. Go ahead.
Hey, I'm Matt. I lead growth at Ground News. On one of the first slides that you had, you said that Gen Z pays for news, and I'm curious, like, what you've seen in terms of like what news they pay for, what news they don't pay for, what they care about compared to like other like boomers, that kind of age group.
So I would really encourage you, there's like a ton of this in this study that is really, since I have like -2 seconds to try to breeze past questions, read this study and the high level things will really get into it. So Gen Z is like trending a little bit younger, but the oldest Gen Z folks are in their mid-20s and starting to pay for things, pay for Netflix, Hulu, things that you have to access. And a lot of folks in this study that tended towards the 18 to 25, 26 range did express like, I am paying for something, for information in some kind. So dig into that a little bit more and see what opportunities are starting. That's really top of funnel stuff. As they get older, they will age into getting used to paying more things and paying more for information in general. But that's all in this study here. Good question. That one jumped out at me too. I was like, what? That I did not understand. Time for one more, but please continue to tweet questions at AmPress. We will continue to have these panelists answer on Twitter, please. Yes, thank you for committing to that. Last one, lucky last one. I want one up from over here because I haven't done that. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, I'm with Host of Works, and I had a question for Naja. The newsletter, I was interested what your demographic was, because our newsletter skews older, and I was curious, what your demographics were and how are you able to attract younger people based on what you've said?
Our audience is older too. It's white, middle-aged, upper-class, suburban. So we were trying to target the complete opposite of that. So we just are going into communities where the younger folks are. So for example, we did a virtual events on HBCUs and them going back to campus. We invited current HBCU students to participate in that. So just involving them in your coverage in a real way.
Okay, we have run over. Thank you all so much. Thank you, good luck with your experiments. Thank you, have a good night. Thanks, y'all. Y'all did amazing.